All right, well, we're about a minute past, so we can get started. Good morning. Welcome to the Mitigation Working Group of the Maryland Commission on Climate Change. I'm Mark Stewart, Climate Change Program Manager at the Maryland Department of the Environment. Please note that we're recording the meeting. Don Goldberg, it looks like you might have started screen sharing with us. Don't know if that's intentional or not. I see lots of MWG members online today. Are there any MWG members who, I'm sorry, anyone who's standing in for an MWG member today?
Marie Rosales attending by proxy for Michelle D at TNC.
Great, thanks, Mari.
Hi, this is Pauline Reeses. I'm attending on behalf of David Lab.
Great, thanks, Pauline.
Anita Jones, I'm attending on behalf of Nicola Tran.
Got it, thanks, Anita. And yeah, Katie, go ahead.
I'm Katie Hauk, standing in for Chair Hoover.
Great. Thanks for joining us today. Anyone else standing in for a member today?
Hi, this is Amanda Hinn. I'm standing in for Morgan Ellis from MDOT for the first half hour.
Got it. Thank you. All righty. And Donald, don't know if you can hear us. Looks like you're screen sharing with us again.
Yeah, Mark, if you can just change it, or I can change it.
Got it. Thank you. And thanks to all the public participants joining us today. We're going to save some time later on for public comments. Let me turn things over to our co-chairs, Kim Coble and Mike Powell, for opening remarks.
I can start if you'd like, Kim. There's obviously been a lot of developments, particularly on the federal level, since the plan was put together. And one of the things the mitigation work group thought we should do is take an assessment of where we are, because we are supposed to come up with 3, perhaps 4 recommendations at the end of this year. The policy of the mitigation work group has always been that we don't re-examine recommendations that we made previously. Those recommendations stand. They still continue to be the recommendations we make, whether they've been fulfilled or not. They're still in our recommendations. But then it's what do we want to add to the list of recommendations? Some of us feel that, particularly with developments on the federal level, but also just a reassessment of where we are in the current plan, we should be looking at what measures we would be proposing for that 3 and 4, perhaps to address some of the changes at federal level, perhaps other issues. But that's really the purpose of this. We're not looking to try to rediscuss issues which have occurred in the past, but say, what is the current status of Maryland's climate plan and climate initiatives, and what should we now recommend for the next General Assembly session? Kim, did I cover that quite right, or you want to add to it?
Yeah, I would add, the steering committee discussed this as we tried to talk about what we wanted to accomplish this year, and we asked MDE to basically do the assessment that Mike described. So our job is to look at the implementation of the program, the climate program and the plans in Maryland, and then look at challenges and look at gaps. And that's what this is today. So from there, as Mike said, we want to have a proactive conversation moving forward. What's our recommendations for the state of Maryland, given the status of where we're at now versus looking back so much. So I think it's going to be really fruitful and productive day, at least 2-hour meeting today for sure. So with that, Mark, turn it over to you to present.
All righty. Happy to kick us off. I received a note, Bill from OPC. Were you wanting to share an update about Maryland's efforts on the on addressing electric rate impacts?
Yeah, I am available to do that if you want me to go ahead.
Is it a brief update?
Yeah, I can do it. I can do it briefly.
Okay, sure.
And
Thank you.
and focused on the capacity market issues.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Again, well, for everybody, I'm Bill Fields, Deputy People's Counsel at the Office of People's Counsel. And just as an update to the work we're doing before FERC, that is going to impact customers' bills, residential customers, but also all customers. Coming from FERC capacity market auctions, as well as the RMR contract to keep Brandon Shores and Wagner open. There's pending litigation on both of those fronts. The last capacity market auction that was run last summer resulted in very high prices. Our estimates are that that's going to increase customers' bills approximately $16 a month for the period starting June 1st. The Public Service Commission is still considering how those costs are going to be passed through to customers' bills between the utility and the customers. There's still some timing issues there that the commission is considering. So we're not sure if that's going to start in June or it might start later. The $16 a month estimate is for BGE customers. There's similar numbers for Potomac Edison customers and Pepco customers. Delmarva, it's somewhat less. It depends on what the starting point is when you go to the new rates. The office, my office has filed a complaint with FERC regarding that auction, along with some other consumer advocate offices in the region. It's pending. Obviously, there's been opposition to that, and the commission, FERC, the FERC commission, will make some kind of a decision on it. It's possible that they allow the high prices to go into effect subject to refund, and there'll be further process before FERC as it finally determines what to do. The main argument, well, let me just, before I get to that, I'll talk about, there is a subsequent capacity auction coming up this summer, either in July or August. It's for the next delivery year, which will be the 26-27 delivery year. There's been a number of rule changes that have been proposed by PJM and adopted by FERC that will have some impact on the supply-demand balance and the pricing rules. Probably the primary one is the floor and the cap on the capacity market prices that came from the Pennsylvania governor complaint. But there's also been action. There's also been significant changes that would recognize the capacity benefits of Brandon Shores and Wagner in the upcoming auction. That wasn't the case for the auction that happened last summer and resulted in the high prices, particularly for the BGE zone. We filed a complaint about that with respect to the upcoming auction. There was other litigation. PJM initially objected to the idea of including Brandon Shores and Wagner, but then came around to the idea, filed a proposal to change that, and FERC has adopted it. So those megawatts will be included in the next auction. We think that that could have an impact on how things look for the BGE zone part of the auction. How the supply demand plays out for the entire market, that's where the floor and the cap are going to come into play. There's certainly folks who are saying that they think that for the entire market, it's likely to clear, at that cap, which would then impact all of the zones, even if they're not, even if the individual zone is not, tight on capacity, would still have that price impact from the entire PJM market. There's also been a change in the rules that for requiring all units to offer into the capacity market. There were exemptions in the last auction for some of the intermittent units, storage, solar, wind, and there were changes adopted that will bring in some additional megawatts into the next auction. So now going back, but of course that auction's still to happen. We don't know what the prices are going to be. Going back to the period starting here June 1st and our complaint regarding that, our main argument in that complaint is that it's become quite clear that there were market flaws in that old auction, at the auction that happened last summer, and there's been as I was just saying, a lot of activity to change the rules, and we think it's patently unjust and unreasonable to maintain those results that came from flawed rules that allowed, really we think not a competitive market result in those auctions, which is having a very obviously detrimental impact on Maryland customers. Again, there's not everybody agrees with that. There's opposition to our complaint, and we don't know what FERC's going to do with it. So there's still that to be determined. There's also a number of issues pending. There's issues pending regarding the value of gas units in the markets and whether they're being reduced too much. A lot of discussion about that as well, and that's also pending in the complaint. In multiple complaints actually. And then just I'll finish up briefly. The RMR contracts. There was a settlement approved for the Brandon Shores and Wagner RMR contracts that would allow them to collect a sort of a minimum of $180 million for continuing to run. The bulk of that is collected from Maryland zones, BGE in particular. We have objected to that settlement. We think a more reasonable number, and this was confirmed by the FERC staff, would be something like $100 million. Our objection to the settlement was denied by FERC. We still have the opportunity to ask for rehearing, so there's potential for additional litigation there. But as it stands now, that pretty substantial bill will be coming to Maryland customers starting in June. That we estimated that would cost, well, the full amount of the RMR originally asked for would cost about $5 a month for BGE residential customers. The settlement is only a slight decrease to that, so maybe $4 a month for customers. Again, that's still pending litigation, but as it sits right now, those costs will be coming as well. And those units will be kept on until PJM allows them. It says that they're no longer needed for reliability. Currently, but that's subject to when various transmission projects, at least the Brandon Shores Mitigation Project, and also for Wagner, maybe some of these other projects are actually finished. So that could extend, beyond 28 into 29 or 30. That hasn't been fully determined yet. So hopefully that didn't go on too long, but that's a pretty quick summary of a few of the events, a few of the happenings at FERC on these issues.
Well, we appreciate that update. Obviously, electric rates have been in the news, so thank you for the work that OPC, PSC, and others are doing to try to address these impacts. Kim, I'll ask only Kim and Mike if there are any quick follow-ups for Bill. I have a feeling that we could otherwise open a big can of conversation on this topic. So Kim, am I getting quick follow-ups there?
I mean, I would suggest I'm sorry, Kim, you go ahead.
No, it's go ahead, Mike.
I think there could be a long discussion of that, but we've got to look at a lot of other issues as well beyond just energy generation. So I would suggest we move on unless somebody has some pressing issue.
All righty. Thanks again, Bill, for the update. So moving on to the main act of the day is a discussion that I'm going to tee up with a brief presentation. As Kim and Mike mentioned at the top of the call, we were asked to consider where are we seeing policies that are facing implementation uncertainties, both on the federal and the state policy side, to help the MWG do its core work of thinking about, okay, well, if we see that there are some gaps, what recommendations can you all forward this year to the Climate Commission to help address some of those gaps? So I'll do my best to give you a quick update on where things stand on several key state and federal policies. And first, of course, I want to reorient everyone. This is certainly not news, I think, to anyone at the Mitigation Working Group, that Maryland has requirements in statute to reduce statewide greenhouse gas emissions. As we reported during the last MWG meeting, our preliminary inventory for calendar year 2023 indicates that Maryland was probably around 29% below its 2006 emissions levels in 2023. And as a reminder, our targets are an interim requirement of a 60% reduction from 2006 levels by 2031 and net zero emissions statewide by 2045. And those are the targets that we produced a plan in December 2023 to achieve. So on the federal policy side, I'm going to leverage work that the Center for Global Sustainability at the University of Maryland did and presented to the Climate Commission about a month ago. And I know that we have a few members from the team at CGS that was involved with this. So I will talk at a high level and quickly about some of these federal policies. And I welcome anyone from CGS to chime in and correct the record if I get anything wrong. I want to really draw your attention in these slides because these slides are repurposed a little bit for today's meeting. This has to do with some modeling that CGS has been doing on sort of national level modeling, not specific to Maryland, on what would happen if certain federal policies were rolled back. So you do see a column here that's labeled CGS rollback modeling. That has to do with a separate study and analysis that they have been doing and presented to the Climate Commission. My objective here is not to discuss that modeling, but instead just to give you a quick update, leveraging their status update in this final column about the current status of certain federal policies. So about 13 months ago, the EPA issued new rules for power plants, for new natural gas power plants and existing coal-fired power plants. That sets basic emission limits for those facilities. The Trump administration has announced that it is reconsidering those rules. On the transportation side, there are the CAFE standards, the federal standards that determine the fuel efficiency of light-duty vehicles that are sold, as well as emission standards for freight trucks. Those are also being reconsidered by the Trump administration. Oil and gas methane regulations also being reconsidered. A number of tax credits are being reconsidered. I'm not going to go through everything on this, but important to note, in the transportation sector, the NEVI funding has been suspended. HFC phase down, the AIM Act is being reconsidered. The methane regulations for oil and gas producers have been withdrawn. You see across the board a number of challenges that the Trump administration has posed to some of these existing and important federal policies. There's some other federal rollbacks that are important to note. A ban on new or renewed wind energy leasing on U.S. waters and federal lands, onshore wind permitting, rollback of federal appliance efficiency standards, the withdrawal from the Paris Agreement, freezing of greenhouse gas reduction funds, IRA and BIL funding freezes and investment uncertainty, threats to the endangerment finding, which is a core finding that allows the EPA to regulate greenhouse gases, certain executive orders, including revigorating America's beautiful clean coal industry, excuse me, a little cough, and tariffs, among other things that are in the federal landscape that present certain challenges. There are also federal actions that affect the ability of states to implement certain policies. The EPA's waiver to allow California to set its own vehicle efficiency standards, and then for other states to be able to adopt those California standards. The House has voted to eliminate the waivers under the Congressional Review Act. The Senate, I believe, is expecting a vote possibly today on that same topic. That's despite that the GAO has determined that EPA waivers under the Clean Air Act are not subject to CRA resolutions, and the Senate parliamentarian has disapproved the use of CRA to roll back waivers. This obviously would present challenges for states, including Maryland, to continue to advance the ACC2 and ACT policies. So, probably no big news there. You all, if you've been paying attention to the news or to the last Climate Commission meeting, know that there are some significant challenges on the federal policy side. I want to spend a few minutes talking about some of our state policies that were called for in the climate plan, but are facing certain uncertainties. Our climate plan calls for an economy-wide cap and invest or similar policies that would expand our existing cap and invest model, which we have for power plants through the RGGI program. It would expand that to other sectors. Or develop similar revenue-generating policies to incentivize individuals and businesses to reduce emissions on pace to meet the state's GHG reduction requirements. You all might recall, because this went through the MWG before going to the Climate Commission last year, that the Climate Commission recommended last year that the General Assembly authorize a study to evaluate the design of the Cap and Invest program by the end of this year, that MDE adopt a reporting rule requiring major polluters to begin reporting data in 2027, and that the General Assembly consider whether to direct MDE to adopt a Cap and Invest program. However, legislation was not introduced in 2025. In each of these cases where I talk about some state policies, I'm also sharing with you what was modeled through our work with the University of Maryland as being the full emissions reduction potential of these policies if they were fully implemented. So what we do not have in any of these cases where, we have policies that are facing, modest uncertainties, we don't know yet what the emissions reduction impact will be of any of those certainties. Instead, what we're able to show at this point are the numbers associated with the full implementation of each of these policies as modeled in the December 23 climate plan. The climate plan and Governor Moore's Executive Order 19 of 2024 calls for the state to achieve 100% clean electricity supply by 2035. Legislation did pass this year to remove waste incineration as a clean energy resource as called for in the climate plan, but legislation to authorize 100% clean electricity by 2035 did not pass. We just discussed briefly what's happening on the federal side in terms of attempts to roll back the waiver to allow states to have the Advanced Clean Cars 2 policy. We also have that in April, Governor Moore issued an executive order delaying enforcement penalties for manufacturers that do not meet the zero emission vehicle sales targets for model years 27 and 28 under certain conditions. And again, as I mentioned, Congress is considering rescinding the waivers that allow these programs. Same update really on the ACT on the Advanced Clean Truck side regarding the same executive order and same potential congressional action. Maryland Transportation Plan. This is, a sprawling plan that covers a whole lot of good transportation initiatives, including importantly for GHG reduction, efforts that would reduce vehicle miles traveled on Maryland roads. So the aim of that plan is to reduce VMT by 20% per capita, and the status is that implementation of the plan is challenged by conflicting and harmful federal directives. And then final one that we wanted to flag is the building energy performance standards. Although smaller in scope than some of the other emission reduction policies, this is our policy that requires certain buildings, larger buildings, to achieve energy efficiency and direct emission reductions. There was a bill that passed the General Assembly this year called House Bill 49. If it becomes law, then hospitals would be exempted from BEPS. Hospitals, we estimate, or the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab estimated, represent about 14% of the emissions associated with the BEPS covered buildings. So that's a significant reduction in the coverage of the BEPS program if hospitals wind up being exempt by law. Also, there was a provision put in that bill that would allow all buildings in Montgomery County to be exempt from the state program, and to the degree that some of those buildings would be covered by the Montgomery County program, it basically says, you can do the Montgomery County BEPS instead of the state BEPS. We don't know yet what the full emissions impact of that would be if it becomes law. The Montgomery County program is one that's focused on energy efficiency, whereas the state program is one that's focused on the reduction of direct emissions. So in summary, as a final slide, just wanted to recap those state policies that are facing certain implementation uncertainties, and putting those numbers all together for you so you can see the relative impact under a full implementation scenario of each of these policies. Where obviously something like Cap and Invest has, under our modeling, really significant emission reduction opportunity, as do those vehicle focus policies, ACC2 and ACT, really significant emission reductions. Clean energy standard, the Maryland Transportation Plan, and BEPS all delivering significant emission reductions under full implementation. So with that, I really want to hand it back over to Kim and Mike to lead a discussion about what do you do with this information, and what do you want to recommend in the face of these certain uncertainties?
Yeah, I think we can open it up for questions and discussion. You know, that by the end of the year, we need to come up with 3, maybe 4 recommendations. So are there gaps that you think we can address, and or is there any information that would be helpful to dig into in the next couple meetings as well in order to get there? So we'll go ahead and open it up. Garrett.
Can I just ask one question for Mark? So the things that you just showed us all, I haven't looked at the state's climate plan in a minute or two, but those all feel like pretty big things. Can you give us a little bit more context about how significant that list, assuming that not all those things just are on pause for who knows how long, how big a deal is that relative to other things that were in the plan that are still, was this all the big stuff basically? Is this really, really bad news?
These are all of the policies. You might recall that there are if I remember correctly, there are 42 actions, I think, policies listed in the climate plan. So I think it is important, and perhaps I should have made a paid special attention to the fact that we flagged a few, right, 5 or so that are facing implementation uncertainties, and we did not flag the other 37. And that is because for the most part, they are, on track, either being developed or fully implemented policies already, where we're not facing, those challenges. So by large part, when we look at the climate plan, a lot of the policies that are in there are tracking really well. These are the ones, per the direction from the steering committee, we wanted to focus in. Yes, but where are we seeing the challenges, right? So that's why we're flagging these, not necessarily because of the size of their emission reduction potential, but because these are where we're seeing some challenges. There happens to be some overlap between where we're seeing challenges and the policies that would achieve the greatest emission reductions.
But let me just add on to Mark, just Garrett, to give you a sense of scale. The largest single bucket is on-road petroleum use, right? And though I question whether Congress really can repeal the California waiver, if they succeeded and the Advanced Clean Cars 2 did not apply, that alone is going to make 2030 very, very unlikely, right? So I'm not trying to go through all the list, but there are some big items on this list.
Jennifer?
This was a really well done presentation, Mark. Thank you very much. It's, absolutely terrifying, as were the vetoes, frankly, by the governor of some important climate legislation, as was the fact that the leadership put in leadership bills that fast-tracked gas, sort of giving an indication that the state is prioritizing cyber and quantum and data centers over long-term sustainability. So given that I do feel that we have to get the public to do a lot more. And we did have recommendations in the last Climate Commission for public education largely through a different committee of the Climate Commission. But I do think that Laura Cherkudian is really on something with her Power in the Park events that help spread grassroots, use of transition to clean energy and awareness around better habits in terms of what we're eating and how we're behaving. And I wonder if we can explore more of the public decides to do things on their own as opposed to regulations are telling them that they have to do things. Thank you.
Arjun?
Yeah, thank you. Just something triggered by what Kim just said. I think we need, probably from the PSC, um, some kind of regulation allowing those balcony solar panels. They are very popular in Germany. You just hang them from a balcony and plug it into your outlet, 110 volt, and it feeds electricity into your system. But you need enabling safety and PSC regulations. They have them in Germany. I think there are hundreds of thousands, or maybe by now millions of them. It's something that renters can implement. So this could be quite important along the lines of what Kim just said. And I don't know if Delegate Charkurian is promoting that with her Power in the Park. But I'd be happy to send more information to people if you want.
Yeah, Arjun, having just returned from Europe, I agree with you. I think that is something we ought to consider for recommendations. It's become very common there. And I don't know what the total is, but that you see them everywhere.
Yeah. If I might just, there's one other technology that's similar that people can implement, even renters, which I think is important for both equity and for the transition, which is high efficiency window heat pumps. So these can also be plugged in. US made window heat pumps are available. They are by gradient. The New York Public Housing Authority has installed some on a pilot basis and is going to move to 30, 40,000. They have hundreds of thousands of units. So they're going to implement them on a tens of thousands of units basis. These are I was shocked at how efficient they are. I did not anticipate. Laurel Peltier had sent me the specs about a year ago. And I think these two technologies by themselves could make an absolutely immense difference. But we need some kind of implementing structure, especially for the panels. I don't know what the landlord issues might be in regard to the window heat pumps.
Let me make just a generalized comment, because I think Jennifer's suggestion also is a good one. I think this is the kind of recommendations I would encourage the mitigation work group to look at. I mean, I think we're in a situation where there clearly is some backtracking on the federal level in particular, and we need to look at what we can make recommendations that have a chance of success to at least make some progress or some offsetting of that. And I would encourage the mitigation work group to come up with ideas like this. Again, the recommendations that we've previously made, the big recommendations, remain on the table. We're not withdrawing any recommendations. But I do think there is an opportunity for us to make some progress on something more specific or more narrower in addition to the bigger recommendation. That's a personal opinion, but it is something I would encourage the group to consider. Garrett?
Mike, can I just ask you a question about just process as we move these forward through the Climate Commission? So I appreciate that the things that we've talked about in the past are still on the table and they're still official recommendations of the group. And it sounds like we've gotten kind of a new directive this year to try to really narrow down and just put 3 or 4 things forward. And those sound like they might be in conflict to me. Is the expectation from the Climate Commission steering committee that the 3 to 4 things we put forward, where if our previous ideas are really our best ideas, they should be in those 3 to 4, and if they're not in the 3 to 4, they're basically, even though we adopted them before, they're essentially forgotten if they're not in the 3 to 4. So tell us more about how you think that would work.
Yeah, Mark and Kim, tell me if you disagree, but I think the 3 and 4 are in addition to any recommendations we've previously made. If we've got 3 or 4 new recommendations, now, maybe they could be additions to or variants of, but that I don't think that we're the fact that we've got standing recommendations restrict us putting 3 to 4 new items on the table. Kim and Mark, do you agree with that?
Yes, that's definitely the direction that the commission is taking. Having said that, I think there may be room for some narrative to highlight previous recommendations that we feel are top priority or most important. So, yeah. Emily?
Hey, are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. I'm Emily Van Norden from Constellation. So this was really helpful, just seeing the breakdown of what's going on the federal side, and it's pretty motivating. After we had our meeting last, at the last mitigation working group, which was focused more on the greenhouse gas inventory, we went back and we're just looking at the inventory and thinking about how it's captured in Maryland. And, obviously we think about this in other states as well. So just thinking about some best practices for greenhouse gas inventory, and having that conversation on our side and seeing, I guess, all of the things that are being reconsidered or potentially rolled back definitely feels like a motivating factor for potentially considering this on the Maryland side, and how important it is to do things like look at our greenhouse gas inventory, think about how we're calculating it, think about how we can best take advantage of the policy goals that Maryland has put in place, and actually get credit for the work that this group and that Maryland does. So yeah, I guess my thinking right now is that it would be nice maybe for this group to have a discussion at some point about Maryland's greenhouse gas goals, the way we see our state getting there, and the way we account for those. Because I think that there's probably some opportunity for getting more accurate accounting going forward, being able to take credit for the things that our state is actually doing, that we should be getting credit for, that we may or may not be, based on just how we're currently accounting for it. And it's my understanding that there's some space, I guess, in the statutory language that set us up to start tracking these goals, to refine the way that we track them. So, this doesn't necessarily get immediately at how do we reduce or strengthen our greenhouse gas goals. But I think tracking itself, getting it more accurate, making it defensible, making, companies that would need to comply with them, getting them on board and feeling comfortable with them, that goes a long way toward help, just helping us along this path. So sorry if that didn't make a ton of sense, but yeah, I just wanted to bring that up. It seems very clear to me that this is an area of opportunity for our state, given maybe federal.
Before I turn to you, Emily, can you give us an example of something where you think our accounting could be improved?
Yeah, I mean, so one small example is, and this is my understanding of how we account, is that we, I think currently we're using a PJM average emissions rate for things like imports. And in the future, this could be harmful to us in terms of reporting out all of our successes, because our offshore wind will interconnect outside of Maryland. So we just want to make sure that we're able to take credit for the offshore wind, for instance, and then not double count it when we use a PJM average emissions rate as well. I mean, that's just one piece. I think I don't have anything prepared today, but if the group is open to it, we could pull something together and share it with the group at a future meeting.
My personal reaction is that would be useful if the rest of the group agrees. Okay. Bob, I think you raised your hand next.
Yeah, this is more going back to the process question. I realize we don't want to throw away or diminish our previous recommendations, but what moves forward? Are we moving forward with all the recommendations, but we have a top 3 or 4? Because I got confused when you said all the recommendations still stand. And I like the last conversation about adopting some of the technology that's going on in Europe. So that would become one of our recommendations. And I think certainly I feel that it has a better chance of being moving forward because I don't see how it would cost the state a lot of money. But anyway, I'm going back to the process. Are we sending up an entire list, but say, here's our top 3, or are we just sending forward our top 3? I don't understand the process.
What we're trying to do, Bob, is put forward new ideas, right? So we're going to have 3 to 4 new ideas this year. We don't have to say, expand the solar industry or whatever recommendation we had around that, because we already said that. So that's where the 3 or 4 comes in for this year. So, the suggestions that have been made so far are great new recommendations that we could put forward.
And remember that those recommendations are commission recommendations to the General Assembly and to the governor, right? So we made recommendations to them, but then they issued their final recommendation. So I agree with Kim. These are 3 to 4 new ideas. Mariana, I think you were next.
Thank you. Yes. I was wondering if these 3 or 4 new ideas could be brought like under a whole umbrella. For example, if we're putting together ideas of new technologies for generating energy at the users, the consumer point, then we could make, let's say, a menu of recommendations of new technologies for strengthening the distributed system of energy, instead of just counting like that one recommendation, because there might be several different new technologies that we would be interested in. Would that be okay?
My perception, Kim, the commission was just trying to not have a huge long list that become unwieldy. If there's some way to categorize it in subsets, but I guess it depends on the details, but that doesn't sound like something that would be a problem to me. Kim, Mark?
No, I think it, if the overarching recommendation is around generating more electricity at the consumer level, here's A, B, C, and D examples underneath that works. But I do see the hand of the almighty Chris Hoagland, who might have a different viewpoint than this. So, Chris.
I would never try to intervene in the MWG's affairs. Just for context for everyone, the commission was just absolutely slammed and paralyzed by the volume of recommendations that came forward from all the working groups last year. It was just too much. The commission had to keep scheduling extra meetings. The commission is large. It's got half the cabinet on it. It just became honestly like a fiscal problem for the state that we kept on having to call everybody back in because we had such a long list of items to work through. So this is an attempt, given the fact that there are 8 working groups, to just set the commission up for success in the fall. Because when it receives 35 substantive recommendations, it's just impossible to make it through and to give them the attention they deserve if any of them are actually going to be carried through, right? If the commission just checks off en masse 35 recommendations, then it's the same as not making any recommendations, honestly, because the commission exists to build consensus around actions for the state to take. And that just requires it to actually focus on things. So that's sort of the purpose of this. So to the extent the MWG is considering how to focus what it puts forward, as long as it's in a way where the commission can really take the time to understand the particular recommendation and act upon it, understanding there are 7 other working groups filling up the commission's agenda, then great. That's the purpose of this.
Garrett?
Yeah, Chris, I wondered when the commission talked about this, one of the other observations that I've had about this overall process is that the commission ends up landing on its recommendations, frankly, in my opinion, pretty much too late for them to be meaningfully affecting legislation that's going to be introduced in the very next session. There's such a short window, and a lot of the folks who are at all likely to kind of pick up the recommendations from the commission and turn that into legislation that they would sponsor in the next session, a lot of them, their plates are already full by the time they actually would receive the recommendations from the commission. I wonder if, you know, it feels to us on the commission or on this working group of the commission, it feels to us like it sure would be great to have many more hours and a lot more time to do research and do thinking and to be able to develop these ideas. And we've all got day jobs and all that stuff. And it also feels like there's sort of limited collective value going through this at all, because there's so little time for the end product to be meaningfully used to craft legislation. And I wonder if the commission itself shouldn't actually be putting its final recommendations out by, you know, August latest every year, so that there's actually a little time for legislators that might be interested in actually looking at what the commission has come up with to say, oh, okay, I like this idea, where they would still have time to turn that into something. Has that been talked about? Or like, what can we do to make what we're putting forward actually more actionable for the purpose of informing legislation in the next session?
Yeah, that's a hard one. If the MWG wants to add a couple of months to the calendar, that would help. I think the challenge we have is that, you know, a lot of the groups don't actively meet during session because everyone's so busy with session. And then one thing we are trying to do with limiting sort of the volume of stuff before the commission is try to make it so the commission can get back to finishing its work in November instead of December. The commission's report is now due in December. It used to be due in November, and we've had to use that extra time. So one small thing at least is try to get the commission's work done in November so that there is a little bit more time before session. I guess we could think about, I mean, backing that up to August would mean that, you know, this working group was having this conversation months ago. So it's sort of a question of how do you back everything up to meet that different timeline. I'm not convinced it's possible, but interested in thoughts.
Or we meet, I mean, so I just an idea, like I would be willing to meet considerably more often as this group over a shorter window of time, if it felt like that would be useful. Like right now we have a meeting once a month between now and October-ish, I think, for this group. Maybe we're meeting every 2 weeks as this group over just 3 months, and then we're done. And that was the window. Just like, you know, we've got a 90-day legislative session where everything needs to happen in 90 days. Like, take a month off, and then we have 90 days of mitigation working group does its thing for the year, and that's it, because now we get to an end point where somebody might be able to do something. Food for thought. I know that's not, I don't want to derail us entirely what we're doing here, because I do have other ideas about what we should actually explore this year, but I think something process-wise along those lines might be helpful for just increasing the usability of what we're doing.
Yeah, appreciate that point, Garrett. And I'll guarantee it won't happen this year, but we can take it back to the commission and see. I think, you know, wearing my advocacy hat, I think there's also ways to get legislators engaged a little bit earlier regardless. So any thoughts on, you know, ideas, recommendations moving forward? Arjun?
Yeah, thank you, Kim. There's not a specific idea, but can we kind of try to sketch these 4 things early on for discussion in the next meeting? Like I mean, I'd be happy to write up the 2 items about window and solar for your consideration, and Mark, I'll send them to you along with the references. That would kind of maybe help. It might not shorten the overall timetable, but it might give the commission an idea of what we're doing if we can agree on a few things early without formalizing in a report.
Right. No, I like that. And the idea here is to see how big the universe is, right, after today's meeting. But if you want to volunteer to write them up, I'm guaranteeing you that would be very appreciated.
I will do that. I'll take you up on it, Kim.
That sounds
You can
great.
reject them all, of course.
Thanks.
All right, I have to leave. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Bye.
Mariana?
Thank you. I was just, wild idea, since we know that there's three main sources of pollution in the state: transportation, buildings, and energy. Is there a chance that we come up with one recommendation for each, for example, something like that?
Yeah, we can do. Yep.
And building on what's been said in the chat and also Arjun's recommendations, Jennifer Laszlo has been talking about this. I never pronounced it correctly. The SAFE, I think.
See.
Thank you. And how those ones weren't used and in the intended purpose. But also Arjun is giving us a set of ideas of technologies. So maybe, since what has been said is that PJM has a backlog of projects, and that's one of the reasons why we cannot come up with bigger projects of generation, then if we're gonna dig into energy and distributed systems of energy, part of that money could be used for incentives that are going to come to strengthen the consumer's capacity of generating their own energy or something like that. It's just, a first draft idea.
There have been discussions about the C fund, and I think Ian is still on and knows this better than I do, but has a number of statutory requirements about what money can go to. And certainly one thing the mitigation working group could consider is making recommendations about statutory changes about how that money must be allocated, either making it more discretionary or mandating allocation to particular subjects.
Great. Thank you for that, Michael.
In the absence of anybody else, let me float one idea of my own. As I mentioned earlier, I think the biggest bucket of greenhouse gas emissions we've got are on-road transportation. One of the struggles we've had with EVs in the past is they're more expensive, and so it's harder to get people to buy those. Right now, for the first time ever, we've got a number of used EVs coming onto the market, and therefore available to more people and more competitive on prices. Yet at the same time, the state has raised its registration fees for EVs. The feds are about to pass a budget bill that calls for an additional $250, I think it is, per year on EV owners. One of the things I think we ought to think about is there a way to prioritize or make it easier for people to buy used EVs, since that's the group that the less wealthy will be buying, and which are cheaper priced and may in fact become more widely available on the market. So I think that is an issue which should be considered. Jennifer?
I think that's a worthy thing to explore, but my sense is that they're not having difficulty selling used EVs except for Teslas, because some people, for political reasons, don't want to be seen as buying Teslas. So I don't know if it's actually a problem that needs to be addressed, that they need a financial incentive to buy the used EV. There does seem to be a lot of interest, from what I understand, from car dealerships in buying those. But I do like your idea of looking at mandating that the money from the CEF goes towards its intended cause, its intended purpose. I think that could be helpful. I'm a little concerned about opening up the can of worms, because I was in the chamber when Republicans were looking at taking away the SAFE totally. So I don't know where we would land if we opened up that conversation. But I do want to say that green banks are such a great investment. I would like to see a lot more of the CEF money go into green banks to help people.
I suspect Ian has some comments on that.
Yeah, well, actually, I raised my hand, Mike, to respond to your thought about EVs. For what it's worth, the obstacle that seems to be cited over and over again about wider electric vehicle adoption is about public charging infrastructure. That's what I hear the most. I'm not saying that price doesn't matter or rebates wouldn't matter, but I feel like it's the charging infrastructure, to, both real and perceived, that that slows adoption. At least that's what people say. Not to say the price doesn't matter. Of course it matters. So, what could we do there? I think would be an interesting conversation. MEA does have a public charging infrastructure program already. Obviously the NEVI program has been suspended, as we heard, for the fast chargers on corridors. Since I'll just say this about the CEF. The law already restricts how the CEF can be utilized. So, the mitigation working group can make a recommendation, or the commission can make a recommendation saying, follow that, but that's already the law. And obviously the legislature has the authority to change the law, and that's what happened this year in a lot of cases, right? So I think we just need to be thoughtful about how productive we can be on that conversation regarding follow the law. With respect to changes to the CEF more generally, obviously there's a formula. We could certainly have a conversation about whether that formula is the right formula for how the funds can be utilized. There are restrictions for the various sub-accounts from RGGI, for example, as well as from alternative compliance payments. And so we could certainly have that conversation, but I think I just want to say that's a different conversation from telling the legislature that we really want you to follow the law and not divert it to other things. So, yeah.
Kim or Garrett, who was first? I don't remember.
Garrett was first.
Well, I'll just just echoing on the EV side. I feel like EV infrastructure, when there was all this discussion of slowing the enforcement of the what could be meaningful requirements on manufacturers for EVs, I think the two main reasons that were cited here were, people don't want to buy them anymore, and there's not enough infrastructure. And I think that I think there are things that can be done to try to encourage people to buy them, but I also think that's a tough nut to crack. I feel like we should focus on specific policy recommendations here that would be meaningful. And I don't see one related to making everyone want to buy them or making people buy them. But I do think on the infrastructure side, there are a couple things worth looking at. And I think one would be requirements around the installation of infrastructure in new construction. And there's been a bill each of the last X number of years, but it's had a few things in it, and it keeps dying. And I think it needs to be reworked, but I think we could maybe help come up with a version of what would actually be reasonable to require in a new construction situation. And I do think there are building types where it's absolutely critical that you require the groundwork be done beforehand if you want to enable folks to actually, especially multifamily properties, to enable folks to be able to do EVs in the future. The other one, though, that I haven't looked at this at all, and I'm curious if anyone else has, but the Public Service Commission has requirements for uptime of charging infrastructure that's owned by the utilities. And we hear complaints all the time. So I work for a county. We hear so many complaints from people who go to EV charging that infrastructure that exists now to find that it is out of service at the time. And I feel like that narrative that the chargers don't work when you get to them is very, very dangerous and damaging to our ability to grow the EV market in Maryland. And I'm curious if there is something that can be done through policy that would affect private charging networks, similar to the requirements the PSC has put on the utilities for utility-owned infrastructure. And I think that needs a lot of thought. I don't know what can be legally done and what would make sense, but I feel like that's one that I would be interested in exploring further.
Kim, I think you're next.
I like that, Garrett. The other one, a little bit differently, but yeah, as we watch everything implode at the federal level, is for Maryland to consider a clean fuel standard. And given that we're a small state and the mixture of the fuels, it's likely to generate money that could then be used to subsidize EV purchases or infrastructure programs or both. So I'd like us to consider making a recommendation around that.
Ian?
I wanted to respond to Garrett's point about reliability of the charging infrastructure. I think that's absolutely right. I do want to caution right? There was a work group that looked at this issue, came up with some standards. 97% uptime, I think, is the consensus standard. That's also the NEVI standard. However, when it got down to, you know, how is it going to be enforced and what are the penalties and things like that, that work group failed to come to a consensus. A bill was introduced this session which did not pass, you know, on that issue. So I just want to say that is a challenge, right? The more you make the rules punitive, you know, it makes it harder to build out that charging infrastructure. So I think there's a balance that has not yet been struck. Perhaps we could take a shot at it, but I want to just say it is a challenge.
Well, that's what we're here to solve, our challenges. So thanks for emphasizing that.
I'll just comment on Garrett's point about the multifamily. My perception is there were disputes in the past about what percentage of parking spaces had to be EV reliable. Primarily the car dealers had wanted numbers close to what the Clean Cars 2 numbers would be, and the building owners wanted numbers closer to what the actual EV adoption rates were. So there may be room to discuss that, because the clash between those two numbers, I think, is what doomed prior efforts. Anyone else? Tom?
Just to put a little bit of a finer point on Michael's last comment, one of the other concerns on the building side was how much electric capacity would need to be reserved in advance that didn't have a customer at the time. That's a real challenge on the building side.
Yeah, if you set the requirement too high a percentage, then you're forcing an enormous expense on the building owner for something that may not be used, or may not be used for many, many years. So I do think that there may be room to talk about a realistic number, at least in my mind, a realistic number, but I don't, it may be that that's a stalemate that'll never be solved, but that is my perception, is that it required enormous expenses up front for spaces that the building owners feel were not going to be used.
I think the other thing that we saw in that, if I'm thinking about the same bill, there were, it might have been a different, but there were different triggers to requirements when you were coming back and doing work on a property, and one of those was if you're doing work that relates to the parking area, and another was anytime you're touching the electric panel. And I think one of our concerns was it's hard to motivate people at the rate we would like to convert from gas furnaces to heat pumps, for example. And you might be touching your electric panel when you're going to a heat pump water heater or an electric heat pump for space heating and cooling, and without any plans to do anything EV related at that time. And we wouldn't want someone who's doing a heat pump project to now all of a sudden have to deal with their parking space as well, just if that wasn't at all part of the planned scope of the work. So I think there were a number of these kinds of factors that, yeah, maybe it's possible for us to kind of hear all that and try to offer something that would, you know, be a compromise in a way that would be a little bit more that might be influential for the process as it moves forward. But it does seem like there's interest in a bill on that, and it would be useful. The one thing I don't want to see us do is just have 4 recommendations that are all offer more incentives for this or more incentives for that. We know there will be no money, and it'll be really difficult to activate funding. So we don't want to do those things. I feel like it's useful to recognize what what would the top of our list be if there was money, or if we were just trying to solve for what are the really important steps. We need a clean energy standard that actually moves the market. There's no way to do that without raising rates on customers, probably. So will there be enough of an app? Like, is there any willingness? I would say from this session, there, seems awfully unlikely they're going to take a meaningful step on a clean energy standard where there would be rate impacts on customers. That's like, this is not the moment to talk about that, but there's no way to make big progress without doing that. The climate plan talked about the cap and invest program. I feel like it should be possible to make some planning progress, at least on that. I'm not sure if we need legislation. We might just need a little bit more backing from the current administration. I think like one of the messages I would like this group to send is like, we really do need the current administration to step up and do what it can do on the big ideas. Because some of these things like cap and invest, you don't have to have the legislature tell you to do it. You could make some progress on that right now. Maybe there's a version of a recommendation that comes from the commission on some of those things that are not really legislative recommendations. But yeah, I like the idea. I like where we're going of let's, for the purposes of legislation, trying to be really practical, and maybe there's a way to bring a little narrative next to it along like, these are the things that will really matter. Of the things we think we can make progress on, these are the top recommendations that we have for the next session.
Kim?
Agree. However, and I'm going to be a broken record on this thing, is that the I'm a little hesitant to say, oh, it's going to cost money, so we can't make that recommendation. I mean, at some point, somebody's got to belly up to the bar on this stuff and say a clean fuel standard, right? There's a revenue generating opportunity there as well as an emission reduction opportunity. So I would hope that kind of thing could be considered as a potential recommendation. I think that if the recommendations we put forward are here's what people can do at their households, we are walking away from some big responsibility that the state needs to own. So that's my 2 cents.
Agreed.
Anyone else? I have a feeling that the PowerPoint presentation that started this put everybody in a down mood. But I do think we really do want to encourage some creative thinking here, because we do want to come up with some new ideas. And I think we've had several here, but I don't necessarily think this is the universe of things for us to consider.
One other thing, again, reflecting on the lack of leadership at the federal level. I think last time I called it the implosion at the federal level, is for Maryland to adopt a power plant rule. And I understand this can be a lift, but in short, we're not going to build base operating power plants in Maryland, or fossil fuel power plants, but we could use them for peaker. Last session, we're expediting that, but I think there's room to really limit the use of those as a transition in a per peaker purposes. So I would like us to consider mimicking that, which has been done in other states as well. Yes, that Maryland would adopt their own power plant rules.
Well, I'm hearing we had 2 that Arjun was writing up. Marianne, you had a proposal on how to look at our energy accounting, I guess I would say. Garrett, you had a recommendation on the multifamily and the EV charging infrastructure. I think it was yours. Then Kim, you've got this proposal on clean fuels, and was there a second there as well?
You don't remember everything I say, Mike?
The
power plant rule.
Oh, that's right. And so that's what, 6 or something for us to start with? All right.
did you get the whole, I mean, there's a lot under the EV that we discussed. So, okay,
Yeah.
that's all under one then. Okay.
Well, I mean, yeah.
Charging infrastructure, and then the other one that I have is utilizing green banks and the CEF investments and looking at whether we want to change the formula or anything relative to that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can I ask? I want to put Ian on the spot. I'm sorry that, or maybe, well, no one's here from PSC. I don't think. But there was a bill this year. One of the big three bills that was in that energy package, that the one that was vetoed, that was all about let's actually have an energy plan for the state. I read it. I read it as in short, we're going to develop a strategic plan for energy in the state, look at supply and demand, and figure out what should we really be doing. And it sounded on the surface to me like, yeah, this is a no-brainer. We should have this kind of planning happening. And it sounded like this will probably require a whole lot of expertise and cost a whole lot of staff time and money that we probably don't have. And exactly where should it live? PSC, MEA, how much of this are we already doing? Like a lot of that, I have no idea. But it seemed like there was a seed of a good idea there. And it was hard to tell from sitting where I sit how much of that, frankly, already happens versus doesn't happen. So I wasn't surprised to see it move through pretty easily in the assembly. Wasn't hugely surprised to see the governor veto it because it did seem like it's going to be really expensive. I don't know if it was more complicated than that or not, but I'm curious whether it feels like there is something akin to that bill that should happen legislatively to set Maryland in a better course for terms of energy planning, like something that's practical that we could do so that we hopefully will end up in a better energy future in a comprehensive way. Can you say anything more about how MEA is looking at that? Like, is there something legislatively that ought to actually happen there?
So I don't think that bill was actually about creating a state energy plan. I think what that bill was about was trying to come up with some load forecasts for the state that really don't exist right now, right? PSC does not do load forecasting, I don't think. PJM does. They don't do it for the state, right? They do it in these zones, which are not the same as state borders. You can try to extrapolate from them, but that's as discrete as they get. And obviously then we're relying on them. And I think there was a lot of concern about that, and that the state should be, yes, be more proactive and coming up with some actual forecasts for the state. MEA does plan to do a state energy plan. We don't need legislation for that. And so I expect that to happen regardless of what happened this session in terms of, bills passing or being vetoed or whatever. But I think that's something a little different than what was envisioned by that bill that was vetoed. I don't know if that helps or not.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like there's a specific additional thing that MEA currently feels is needed through legislation along those lines.
Not to do a state energy plan. We've done them before. That's not something that's novel. I think it would be a question as to whether or how the functions that were envisioned under that office should be considered by, existing agencies, whether it be MEA or PSC, or even PPRP has been mentioned. So I'll just leave it at that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Anyone else? I don't think we necessarily have to close the door on new ideas at this time. If people have some others they want to consider, feel free to put them out there. But remember that time to schedule stuff on agendas is limited. And so I do think we have to, and as Garrett reminded us, we need to get recommendations into a point where they can make a difference. So I do think it's important if people have ideas, they float them. So Chris, Kim, Mark, any thoughts you have on that?
taking a lot of notes, and there are a lot of ideas that have been shared. So one of the things that we can do on the staff side is compile this and reflect it back out to the group following the meeting, so that we can all digest it and think about how to come into the next meeting to have a conversation about the honing in on the priorities, potential priorities for this year. I'll also offer up to the co-chairs the idea that we've got a good number of public callers. We could also open up for a few minutes public comment to get other ideas on the table at this point.
If there are no others, then of members who want to comment, Mark, why don't you do that?
Will do. Anyone who's not a member want to jump into the conversation, feel free to just raise your hand or put your name in the chat if you want to provide comments today. Yeah, Chris Sticks, go ahead. Chris, not sure if you're talking to us. It looks like you're still muted.
Hi, sorry. One thing I think we should do is look at the money that's going into building efficiency and see look at what we get out of each different kind of program that we have, and so that we can direct what's a sizable amount of dollars into the places that generate the most efficiency. And indirectly greenhouse gases.
I think it's a good question there, Chris, and I appreciate that. As we make decisions, then though, a lot of those programs are oriented towards low-income households, communities at risk. So it's not just a single.
Separate out just look at low income as a set of programs, and then look at the different measures that are being done and which ones are generating the greatest results. And I don't think we look at that. But separate low income from non-low income. I agree.
Got it. Okay, thank you, Chris. Did I see a hand up?
I thought Don had a hand up, but I don't see it now. Oh, there it is.
Well, this actually relates back to Mark's presentation. I just wanted to note that the numbers of tons in reduction we're not getting by not being able to fully implement all these programs. The programs do interconnect, and particularly I wanted to point out that Cap and Invest could substitute for some of the missing sectoral actions, not fully substitute, but certainly help to fill the gap. I just wanted to remind people of that.
Thanks, Don. Any other public commenters, or still open floor, of course, open mic for members to continue this discussion. Jennifer.
So I know that individual commissioners have until June 1 to put forward any idea they have. And my understanding is in our process that the committees have until September 1 or something like that. But I'm wondering if you have polled the various cabinet secretaries that are relevant to this mission around, given all we now know at the federal level and with the new state legislature situation, what do you think is particularly important for us to consider, and maybe add those items to the ideas that we've generated so far, and maybe put together an online survey for us to look at. I will say that in the presentation that you just gave, I was particularly grateful for the fact that you had a column that showed the greenhouse gas implications of the various policies, because you can wave your hands about a lot of different things, but the ultimate math is what we're looking for that would be particularly helpful to try and choose the policies that will have the most impact on greenhouse gases.
Thanks for the question. Some of that work is happening now through the governor's sub-cabinet on climate, where the cabinet secretaries and their staff are engaged in thinking about the climate implementation plans for each agency and trying to identify priority climate measures on an agency by agency basis. So I know that the sub-cabinet is due to have its second report out this fall. Which is when we'll, I'll have more insight into the agency head decisions around additional climate actions and prioritization of the actions that they called for in their climate implementation plans last December.
Mark, just along those lines, I feel like if you and Chris Hoagland here, I would love to know what, if you guys were answering this question, what kinds of things have we not been talking about on this call that, you all would suggest we think about for next year? We know you think about this more than any of the rest of us here, so you shouldn't just be taking notes on this call.
24/7, which is why I'm going to pass that question right over to my boss.
I mean, listen, everybody needs a hobby. I think, the climate plan advanced a lot of concepts, some of which are, you could consider to be alternatives to some of these. I think, Kim, you mentioned a clean fuel standard, something to think about as an alternate policy approach to transportation. There are 4 or 5 states that have a version of that policy. So there could be some learning to be done there.
Well, I don't know if that was a mic drop moment, but Kim, Mike, back to you. If we're not hearing additional ideas for this meeting, choice is yours on adjourning early. I will offer on the staff side to, as I mentioned, type up these notes so that we can try to circulate that around and help us prepare for the next meeting.
I think that makes sense, Kim.
Yeah, unless you guys just want to stay on the phone here on the web for another half hour for fun. Otherwise, I say we adjourn. And thank you, Mark, for the presentation. And thanks, everybody, for the discussion. And productive, very, very helpful. All right. Have a great afternoon.
Good Memorial Day for everybody.
Thank you.
Goodbye. Good day.